So Nashville.
Nashville.
All right, let's do this.
Now, after years in the making, Robert Altman brings to the big screen along the way to Nashville with 24, count them, 24 of your very favorite stars. David Arkin, Barbara Baxley, Ned Beatty in Nashville, and the fabulous performances of Karen Black, Ronnie Blakely, Timothy Brown in Nashville, along with the spectacular Keith Carradine, Geraldine Captain, Robert Bouquet in Nashville, and the exciting appearances of Shelley Duvall,
Why, it takes work to reach the top.
and Henry
Keep
Gibson in
going.
Nashville, and the fantastic Scott Glenn, Jeff Goldblum, Barbara Harris in Nashville, not to mention the...
So Nashville is a 1975 American music drama directed by Robert Altman. Throughout the movie, Hal Philip Walker, who is a replacement party presidential candidate, who you never actually see throughout the movie, is gathering musical performers and arranging events to promote his campaign.
To marvel at the magnificent stars through the magic of stereophonic sound and living color picture right before your very eyes without commercial interruption.
Throughout the entire movie, there are 24 main characters that you will see. At first, it was pretty difficult for us to kind of get a grasp on who was related to who and what their roles were exactly, but we did manage to group them into 3 categories. First one would be the media, which would be anybody involved directly with Hal Philip Walker or any other media source. So that would be like John Triplett or Opal, who worked for the BBC. Our second group is the entertainers, those are the characters who perform any sort of song, whether it's good or bad. That would be characters such as Barbara Jean or Haven Hamilton. And our final group is the supporters, who are characters who attend venues, interact with the important characters, or have any sort of connections to the main characters, such as Bud Hamilton, who is Haven Hamilton's son, or Kenny, who is the assassin.
The first chart we developed was a character scene comparison chart. The scenes are lined up along the bottom, and the characters lined along the left. The squares represent what scenes the characters show up in. And the color code is red, blue, and white. The red represents the media, the white represents the entertainers, and the blue represents the supporters. The second chart that we developed was a scene length chart. It's the same setup as the other chart, except the bars represents how long each scene is. The blue represents the inside scenes, and the red represents the outside scenes. The last chart we developed was the chart that shows how Altman transitioned from scene to scene and how he transitioned from within the scene. The red represents how the singing transitions, the black represents the talking transitions, and then the 2 symbols represent when he used props or when he used words to hint that what's coming up in the next scene.
So after we did the analysis of the character scene chart, I translated that information into a musical piece. So to begin with, I took the scenes, which consisted of 5 days, and turned those into bars of music. Then in order to get the note, duration, and position on the musical graph, I looked at characters. For example, however many characters are in each scene, that represents a note on bar graph. So the more characters in a scene, the higher up on the bar it is. And in the duration, I looked at how long a day took in the movie and compared that to the length of the scene. So the first day was about 42 minutes long, and the first scene was about 8 minutes, so I took that ratio and figured it to be about a quarter note. And I used that method to translate Mood Nashville into music.
So Robert Altman's style is very unique throughout the movie, and this is kind of something that he works with, and he wants it to be as much as real life as possible. So if there's any bloopers throughout the movie, he just kind of leaves them in. It's part of the movie.
Yeah, an example of that would be
Like when Mary from Tom, Bill, and Mary is singing and she kind of gets a frog in her throat, and he just keeps filming.
Yeah, or like the crash scene at the beginning of the movie where they had to, well, while they were filming it, they had to have cops there helping direct traffic, and you can obviously see the cops in the scene, but they don't go back and edit it or reshoot the scene. They just kind of leave it in there.
And you wonder what's wrong in Congress. No wonder we often know how to make a watch, but we don't know the time of day. No wonder it takes 6 or 7 years to get a final decision. You get one at all. When somebody happens to rob your store, or break into your house, or burn your neighbor. Teachers know how to run normal schools. Farmers know how to run bad farms. Engineers know how to run gigantic projects. Yes, I'm talking about replacing patriotic emotion as my country is the thing.
So throughout how the movie itself worked is they created a unique web of character relationships and connections throughout the movie that incorporated all 24 characters.
There's many scenes where you will see most of the characters, but they'll be interacting in different ways and with different people. And also we noticed throughout, the more times we watched it, the more connections we were able to make. Like, such as the first time, personally, I was kind of still trying to figure out who was who in the movie, and then the more I watched it, I would realize that this certain person was in this scene that I hadn't realized before.
Yeah, it wasn't finally until I think we went through and got an entire list of all the characters and then set up a spreadsheet so that when we could go through and watch it again, we could keep track of exactly who was in what scene and what they were doing. Because otherwise, because Robert Altman, throughout the movie, he's jumping from scene to scene, and they're all taking place at the same time, so he just jumps from scene to scene back and back instead of filming out the entirety of one scene and then going to the next scene. So he wants to give you this perception or this visual of what's happening all at the same time.
And he sometimes uses conversations to connect the scenes. He jumps to...
Yeah, this Trout.
We're going to have a little fundraiser, and we need some help with some
Talent?
Yeah, talent, right. I tell you what I'm going to do. Fellas, I'm working with is here, and I'm going to put him on the phone, and maybe he can tell you exactly what it is we need. John Triplett's his name. All right. Trout. This fellow's name's Trout.
Trout.
Yeah.
Hello, Trout.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Fantastic.
Listen, as Del told you, we're putting a smoker together.
Right.
I think next Monday night, hopefully. And what we need is a young lady to entertain the people.
Another interesting thing he did was the use of music was really, really strong, especially how each song kind of tied into what was going on at the time or what was going on in that particular character's life, or just in general how it fit the setting that was going on.
Yeah, and so some of the things that I think didn't work very well for the movie was that because there were so many people, you almost have to watch it a second, third, or fourth time just to understand what is all happening in the movie, because the first time you watch it, it's a little overwhelming, I think. 24 characters, that's a lot of characters. Yeah, so the reason for the 24 characters is...
We laugh and count horses as we drove along. We were young then, we were together.
As we finished our research on the movie Nashville, we started looking at the Jewish Museum by Libeskind, and this kind of relationship between the movie Nashville and the Jewish Museum was this idea of undermining your expectations, because throughout the movie, Robert Altman would either just cut off a scene completely, like you'll hear someone ask someone a question, and they'll just cut off the scene, and then they never actually end up going back to it to answer the question. But it's also this idea when Libeskind was doing research and figuring out a proposal for the Jewish Museum, he writes, he was kind of inspired by this 4-act musical piece that doesn't have any music after the second act, and so it just kind of stops, and it's kind of undermining your expectations of what you would expect, and so he was kind of inspired by this and wrote out his proposal for the building on musical paper. So Libeskind translates this idea of undermining your expectations into his design of the building by creating these voids or these unique design aspects throughout the building that you wouldn't expect normally, like these concrete voids in the building that you can't actually go into. They're just only there for light. I mean, you can look into them, but there's no way actually to go into the space itself. Another thing that he did was, there's this very large Jewish museum, and then there's no actual obvious way into the building or an entrance. So the entrance into the building is actually in a neighboring building, and you have to go into that building, and then instead of going up into the museum, he takes you down underground into through a staircase. And so the film itself that we watched on the Jewish Museum was extremely helpful, I think, and it kind of, in the same manner, was as helpful as it was to watch the commentary for the movie Nashville, because you have the actual, like in the case of Nashville, you have the director there actually commenting on his own work, and you can understand his decisions, why he decided to make something or why he just decided to leave something in there. And it's kind of the same with the Jewish Museum, because we get this commentary side from Libeskind himself, where he can walk through and tell us why he decided to do something or what challenges he had through his design, and how he had to justify his decisions to the board on why he wanted these voids in the building.
But I try to convince them that it's necessary to organize the museum around completely different ideas about a museum, because such a museum is necessary now.
I guess one way that it didn't work well is that the video itself wasn't, I mean, it was very helpful in some ways as the design, to understand the design and the concepts of the building, but it wasn't very informational in understanding the technical aspects of the building. You didn't get necessarily a holistic idea of what a floor plan would look like. I mean, you show the overall building, but they don't actually show you a floor plan. It's very diagrammatic and very conceptual throughout the movie. So I think that's, in that way, it could be very helpful or not very helpful in some other ways, but...
Yeah, exactly. Like you were saying, the Jewish Museum, it focused a lot on kind of like the pretty aspects and how it was aesthetically pleasing and kind of showing people what they want to see. Because people technically really don't care about mechanical systems and floor plans. Like if you're not an architect, you're just like, I want a beautiful building. But when you do things like online research, like is what we did for the Figge Museum that we researched, then we're able to get more into the technical aspects. We're able to look at floor plans. We're able to look at elevations and get square footages and things like that. And we get this from multiple resources, so we're able to kind of figure out which ones are kind of valid resources and which ones maybe kind of not so much. But
so is maybe the bad thing then about doing the research then not being able, like, do you feel like we didn't understand the concept very well of that building? Just more so the technical side?
Yeah, I feel like it was more of the technical side, because we were able to, they gave us a list of materials, they gave us a list of square footages and the list of the architects and everybody who's involved, but we really didn't get to see inside the architect's mind and be like, what were you really thinking when you designed this?
Yeah, because I remember at one point we had everything written up on that whiteboard on everything we researched and what we found in the different buildings, and the information was similar in some spots, but completely different in others, because some you could find in one and you just couldn't find it in the other, in the types of ways that were researched them.
Exactly. And it was also kind of a hassle to hunt down all this information, because you would go to multiple websites and they would repeat the same information, but there may be one or two sentences that you're like, oh, that's unique, that's something different. So you don't want to kind of skip over everything in hopes of finding something that could be really helpful.
Kind of like the building tours. Like, I thought the building tours were one of the most helpful ways to get information regarding like details, how the building functions, like AC, mechanical. Richard Altman and Kerry Nixon were very knowledgeable about the buildings they presented and worked on.
So I guess the text was probably the most different. So
Yeah.
I guess how did you?
Well, first of all, it was just hard to understand. Like, they didn't just come out and tell you what they were trying to talk about. They wanted you to interpret it and kind of come up with your own perspective.
Yeah, they definitely didn't just like flat out say anything. Like, even just the line that I read, it could be very open to interpretation. The idea of death and decay in the museum. I mean, he goes on to explain it a little bit, but not enough to really give you a full understanding.
Yeah, they really make you think and form your own opinion. Overall, though, I mean, I think we got a lot of good information from all our sources. I mean, there was Nashville, had a ton of information, and after watching a couple times, we got used to all the country music and the politics. But it was very informative and a really, really good example of Robert Altman's filming style. Then there was the precedence.
Commentary was very helpful too.
The commentary,
I
definitely.
think one of the most interesting things was being able to connect all of them together somehow. Like, whether it was through music, whether it was through transitions, like the filming style of Robert Altman even related to some of the museums, and it wasn't only about the music that related Libeskind to Robert Altman, but like this idea of space, and I don't know, it was very.
Even the texts, which we kind of thought were not as helpful, but we still were able to relate them in the way of like perspectives, and the fact that there was a whole article on museums, which obviously would relate to the museums that we looked at.
And even though they were completely randomly assigned, it almost seemed like they were put together in some way that
they fit our movie and they fit all the texts, yes, really well.
And the order that we looked at them too helped.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then with the building tours, which we're still continuing to go on, that will continue to help us and help us learn exactly how buildings function and how to most efficiently design a building.
And you wonder what's wrong in Congress. No wonder we often know how to make a watch, but we don't know the time of day. No wonder it takes 6 or 7 years to get a final decision. You get one at all. When somebody happens to rob your store, or break into your house, or murder your neighbor. Teachers know how to run normal schools. Farmers know how to run vast farms. Engineers know how to run gigantic projects. Yes, I'm talking about replacing this lawyeristic, red-taped, and blank-taped government with the yes and no language of farmers and teachers and engineers and businessmen. I'm not pessimistic about this country.